There's a man called the Doctor. He lives on a cloud in the sky, and all he does, all day, every day, is to stop all the children in the world ever having bad dreams.
Am I going to have the nightmare tonight?
The snow is new. Possibly alien.
It could be a terrible weapon in the wrong hands, don't you think?
I think winter is coming.
Tomorrow the snow will fall, and so shall mankind. She is coming.
Naughty, naughty children, run!
Carnivorous snow meets Victorian van.
What is this?
I said I'd feed you. I didn't say who to.
Doctor! They're growing! The snowmen are growing!
Gotcha. It will build an army of ice. And it will be the last day of humanity on this planet.
Being a Christmas special, there are lots of snowmen in this.
What is this?
I said I'd feed you. I didn't say who to.
And they're all absolutely demonic. Hopefully it'll be a scary Christmas adventure rather than a cozy, toasted marshmallow version of Doctor Who.
Listen to me, the snow's feeding off your thoughts.
Hopefully there will be people diving behind sofas.
Last day of humanity on this planet.
To all Doctor Who fans, Merry Christmas.
Hello everyone and welcome back to Doctor Who Month. This week I'm reviewing Scream of the Shalka, which is technically the 40th anniversary special. Shalka is weird because it's one of very few pieces of Doctor Who that was intended to be canon when it was made, but is specifically not canon now. Not that that stopped fan theories from circulating trying to fit it into canon. Scream of the Shalka was an animated webcast released in 2003 on BBC I, the BBC's website at the time. They had experimented in the past with various webcasts, including Doctor Who ones. These previous ones, including Death Comes to Time in 2001, Real Time in 2002, and Shada previously in 2003, were all less animated stories and more audio stories with illustrations. James Goss, the producer of these webcasts, then pitched a fully animated story. Scream of the Shalka was supposed to be an official continuation of Doctor Who, introducing a new Doctor and companion. However, shortly before the serial premiere, the Russell T Davies revival was announced, making the canonicity of Shalka questionable before it even came out. Sequels were canned and continuity was ignored when the new series came out and made this ninth Doctor no longer canon. This serial was written by Paul Cornell, who had previously written plenty of Doctor Who for Virgin, Big Finish, and Doctor Who magazine, as well as plenty of non-Who projects. He would go on to write for the new series. If I had to describe the story of this serial, I'd describe it as it's a fine story with some good sci-fi ideas, good pacing, and alright characters. And I don't think the story is really what's fascinating about this serial. It's everything that frames the story. The animation, the Doctor, the side characters, the cast, and the context that the story is supposed to exist in. The story was kinda supposed to be a run-of-the-mill Doctor Who story. It was probably a deliberate decision to not be incredibly ambitious for a few reasons. First off, while animation has its budgetary benefits over live action, it's not immune to budgetary concerns, so anything super ambitious would be difficult on a budget for a webcast. Remember, internet was slow. The animation couldn't be too complex. Second, it was supposed to introduce the characters and to set the tone of the series, and juggling that with a groundbreaking story would have been difficult. So let's talk about those things that I said are fascinating. Firstly, the animation. The animation is weird. Sometimes it looks fine, but other times it looks like early 3D animation. But it's 2D, if you know what I mean. Remember, this was animation to be hosted on a website in 2003, so because of that and a very low budget, the animation is very limited, and the video isn't very high definition. It's kinda like watching a 1960s Hanna-Barbera cartoon. I'm fine with it for the most part, but sometimes it does get a little bothersome. Sometimes you can tell that because of time and money, a lot lot of the backgrounds are very basic. For example, the TARDIS set is a console, a staircase, and some bits of furniture in front of a largely black background. Also, there are these weird lines all around the image. I don't know if that's from taking an image that's meant to be played on a 2003 computer monitor and playing it on a TV though, so I'm not going to grill it too hard on that. The Doctor. This is the only appearance of Richard E. Grant as the Doctor. Well, kind of. We'll get back to that in a second. His Doctor is kind of interesting. Looking at it now, I'm pretty much fine with it. Like, if this version of the Doctor was on the actual show, it would probably be fine, but that's mainly because of the variation we've had in the Doctor since. Stacked against the classic Doctors, it's a pretty drastic difference. The only thing coming close, really, is the Paul McGann version. He's dark but compassionate, similar to Christopher Eccleston, but also very high class and homesy. Do I think it's the best version of the character? No. He's very sarcastic in a cynical way that can make him come off as kind of mean-spirited, but he definitely has his very doctorly moments. I don't think he's as bad as a lot of people claim he is, but I wouldn't have been very crazy about him being an official Doctor. The side characters are interesting too, and really reveal a lot about both the parallels and differences between this version of reintroducing the show and Series 1. They're similar in that both see the Doctor meeting a young modern woman in a town being invaded by aliens, trying to take over the world. She is lifted out of her everyday life, and at the end she decides to travel with the Doctor instead of staying on Earth with her average everyday boyfriend. They both feature a Doctor who's regenerated since we last saw them, and we didn't see that regeneration. But they're different in how they treat themselves in respect to the original series. In the Davies version, while he doesn't want to alienate the viewers with references and baggage related to the classic series, he wasn't afraid of using the show's history to tell a good story, believing they just had to introduce this new audience to the show. Shalka, on the other hand, had a full-on embargo on bringing back stuff from the classic series. James Goss asked Paul Cornell to not include references and appearances of things from the past for the same reason, to not alienate new viewers. But there lies two problems. One is that, unlike the Davies version, which was being broadcast on national television where anyone could watch, Scream of the Shalka was something you found by searching for online. The people who watched it were almost exclusively Doctor Who fans, so there was no one to alienate. The second is that you're throwing basic continuity out of a 40th anniversary special. This story featured the Doctor teaming up with the military. Why not make that unit? How would that alienate audiences? Also, the Master's in this as a robot that contains the Master's consciousness that the Doctor saved and inhabits the TARDIS as somewhat of a companion. Paul Cornell came up with a backstory explaining how this happened, but because they didn't want to alienate viewers, this wasn't put in. It's referenced, but only vaguely enough that viewers probably thought that the Master's consciousness just survived the Eye of Harmony from the TV movie, and the Doctor put it in a machine, despite Cornell having a completely different idea. This leads me to the cast, which is pretty crazy in perspective of Doctor Who as a show. Richard E. Grant had previously played the 10th Doctor in the 1999 comedy sketch Curse of the Fatal Death, and would later play Walter Simeon, a puppet of the Great Intelligence, in Series 7 of the Revive show. Sophie Akinito, who plays the Doctor's companion Allison, would later play Liz 10 in Series 5 of the Revive series. The Master is voiced by Derek Jacobi, who would play the Master in Series 3 of the Revive series, and also in a lot of Big Finish stories. David Tennant even cameos in this.
We're locked up for the weekend! Go away! There's nothing here!
Very star-studded for something that's no longer canon, and is kind of orphaned in its own continuity. Because of the new series, this is no longer canon, and the new stories were cancelled. All that was made was Scream of the Shalka and a short story called The Feast of the Stone. Originally, the first series with this Doctor would have been a trilogy though. A considerable amount of work was even put into a second serial called Blood of the Robots that ended up being cancelled, and there were various pitches for a second serial that were turned down that could have ended up rewritten as a third serial. Plus, there's that unrealized backstory I was talking about before. So there's actually a lot more to this universe than a lot of people think, and that's what next week's discussion will be about. In the meantime, enjoy some of my other videos. I'll be back next week reviewing Dimensions in Time, and until then, don't forget to subscribe for daily videos on the franchises you love, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.
The scream had sliced through the silence like a knife through flesh. As vibrations echoed from crag to crag, something deep within stirred, its sleep disturbed. Yet it couldn't sleep now. A scream hadn't been heard here for centuries, and the cries of the past had never sounded like that. That had been a bellow, a roar as if the fabric of reality had been ripped apart. Not the shriek of a terrified child, and the cave wasn't empty anymore. Dust that had lain for eons had been displaced by the arrival of a tall, blue box. Dancing in the light from the fiery beacon that pulsed atop the structure, that low resonating hum that cocooned the box was fascinating, and the something deep within reached out, only to find its consciousness touched, pricked by another presence. A presence the like of which it had never felt before. A presence it found appealing. Something deep within awoke and felt the hunger gnawing. The TARDIS door slammed, leaving the Doctor standing alone, staring out into the vast darkness that lay beyond. He stepped forward, footsteps echoing away into nothing. The chamber he was in must be enormous. He sniffed the air as he walked forward a few more feet. Rank, he said to himself, coming to a stop at a sheer rock wall. Nobody's been here for centuries. He ran his hand down the wall, feeling the grain. It was warm and wet. The Doctor looked back towards his TARDIS and sighed. "I guess I'd best go after him," Allison said, to break the awkward silence. The Master stood opposite, arms folded. "Well," he shrugged, "I can hardly do that, can I, my dear?" Allison moved to grab her jacket from the back of the armchair. "Do you think I should apologise to him, then?" And now we add guidance counsellor to my ever-growing list of new duties. The Master placed both hands wearily against the controls. "Miss Cheney, you will do what you will do." He flicked a switch and the door swung open. Allison said nothing. Instead, she turned and walked the length of the control chamber and disappeared into the square of darkness framed by the doors. As the doors closed behind her, the Master cast an eye heavenwards. Kids. Allison stepped from the threshold of the TARDIS into a stone chamber. She drew her jacket around her, hugging her arms tight around her body against the cold. Looking around, she saw the Doctor, some distance away, striding across the chamber. "Doctor!" "Not now, I'm talking." The Doctor waved his hand dismissively at whoever was trying to distract his attention and turned back to the sea of faces, their fixed, rapt expressions urging him to finish his tale. "And so I said to the Slavian at the bar can stay, but the fella at the Quark will have to go." After a pause, the entire room erupted into laughter. They even liked his jokes. This was the best party he'd been to since Woodstock. Now, where was that waiter with his champagne? In the back of his mind, the Doctor seemed to remember someone was telling him he was drinking more these days, but a lot had happened recently. He had changed. Could they blame him? And besides, this was supposed to be a party. Allison stared after the Doctor. Had he completely ignored her? He was now standing with his back to her, hands in the air, seemingly staring into space. She was starting to think that maybe he was a few fries short of a Happy Meal. She shuddered at the drop of icy water as it landed on the back of her neck. She looked up. It felt like somebody was running cold fingertips down her spine. Sheer walls of dank, mould-infested rock stretched up towards the gloomy roof. It was like some great, petrified cathedral. Not far away, just beyond the motionless Doctor, stood a squat, crumbling base of rock. It looked like some sort of crude altar, but she couldn't be sure. A stone trough ran down the altar. A trough for what? Whatever it was, the rock surrounding it was stained jet black, And where was that breeze coming from? She turned 360 degrees, but there didn't seem to be any kind of entrance or exit. There was a heap of slick boulders piled up in a massive heap behind the TARDIS. Whatever had happened, Alison knew she didn't like it, so it was time to grab the Doctor and get the hell out of here. And she started to move towards the hospital bed. Her Nana looked beautiful, propped up by the luxurious amount of pillows. "What's wrong, pet?" Nana asked, her voice small and croaky. "Oh, nothing," Alison replied, confused for a second. She looked around the room, the flowers her mum bought every day, the plastic water jug, the heart monitor, the punctuating silence within its regular beat. "You're not off, are you?" Big grey eyes gazed back at her. Alison smiled, trying not to look sad, just like her mum had told her. "No, of course not, Nana." And would you believe it, the treasure turned out to be nothing more than a lovely bunch of coconuts. The Doctor's smile widened as his guests responded warmly to his story. "That's fine story, old boy," said the Colonel, ruddy-faced, pumping the Doctor's hand vigorously. "Worked up quite an appetite listening to your exploits, Doctor." "Most kind, Colonel, but as I always said, you could work up an appetite snoring the day away in your armchair." The room fell silent. A social tension ripe in the air. The guests shifted uncomfortably. Had the Doctor gone too far this time? The silence lasted a second longer before the Colonel erupted into laughter, his face reddening a shade deeper. The rest of the entourage followed suit. Social grace restored. The Colonel slapped the Doctor on the back and moved off, his eyes on the waitress who had just passed. The Doctor smiled good-naturedly. The old rogue. Left alone for a minute, the Doctor let his eyes roam around the room. Where was she? Why did she always wander off when he was in full flow? He felt the gentlest of touches on the back of his neck, causing the Doctor to scrunch up his shoulders instinctively. "Stop it," he giggled. The finger persevered. "You know I hate being tiggled." The Doctor laughed out loud, turning and grabbing the hand, wincing as the acrid stench hit his nostrils. Throwing his arms up to protect himself from the faraway blast of another explosion, the grit stung against his eyes, more bombs thudding in the distance, connecting with the scorched, decimated earth. He stumbled across the rubble, climbing as high as he could to survey the carnage before him. Spots of white flesh and ripped uniforms acting as markers for the dead beneath the ruins. Alison held her Nana's tissue-thin hand. She could almost see the weak pulse fighting its way through the vein in her arm. For her Nana's sake, she fought back the tears, biting her lip so hard it hurt. What's wrong, pet?" her Nana asked. Before she could answer, the radio in the corner of the room crackled with static, bursting into life. She turned, her arms in the air, surrounded by a throb of bodies, all dancing, arms pumping in time to a wicked beat. The euphoria was overwhelming, the wave of love rushing through the crowd. And she moved close to Joe, their faces almost touching. "This is great!" she shouted, and let the music take her to... Her Nana stirred, eyes flickering, but then she was still. "It's all right, Nana. Go back to sleep." She squeezed the hand that she would have clung on to forever, but the touch on her shoulder pulled her away. "She's gone, love." It was her mum, face glistening with tears. The pit of Alison's stomach fell away as she buried herself into her mum's chest. After a minute, her mum put her hand under her chin, and she looked into Joe's eyes, the music pounding, drowning everything else out. The Doctor revelled in laughter at yet another expertly delivered morsel of bon mot. Alison hugged her mum. The Doctor giggled, swatting away the hand. The music blasted her eardrums. She loved everyone. The battlefield was empty, save for the Doctor, alone, victorious. The beat goes on. The clock struck midnight. The audience laughed. The Doctor frowned. He looked into his champagne glass and before pouring it onto the floor. Blood splattered over his shoes. He looked up at the other guests who were happily taking back huge mouthfuls of thick red blood from their overflowing champagne flutes, letting the sticky substance in slow-moving rivers down their chins. Something's wrong. Doctor! A lone voice, clear and bright in the room. The doctor whipped round, finding himself in the stark cold of the chamber. A shaft of light spilled across the stone floor, reaching his shoes. The TARDIS doors were open. It was shining like a beacon, and the Master framed on the threshold, his arm outstretched. Doctor, take my hand. The doctor took a step forward but hesitated. A playful whisper breathed in his ear, a hand on his shoulder, pulling him back, and he turned. The party was still in full swing, a sea of faces, waiting for the next tale. He had a part to play. No! With a defiant turn, he wrenched himself away from the crowd and threw himself towards the TARDIS in the reaching hand of the Master, who grabbed the Doctor and pulled him inside the TARDIS, his android strength hurling him across the control room. The Doctor was immediately on his feet, running for the doors, only to be thrown back by the Master again. Get out of my way! Allison is still out there. Do you really think I'm going to let you go back out there? Look! The Master pointed at the scanner screen. Allison was suspended in mid-air over the altar, her arms pulled out to the side, her body convulsing, and unseen terrors swarmed around her. The corners of the cavern were growing darker, the shadows moving in from all sides. Do you see them? The Master squinted at the screen. The shadows? Yes, most intriguing. The Doctor bounded across to the controls, pouncing on levers and dials like a cat. There's obviously something out there. A ghost in the machine, if you will. The Master arrived by the Doctor's side in a more sedate pace. What do you mean? Oh, really, Doctor, you can be slow on the uptake sometimes. You weren't alone out there, and I'm not talking about those hallucinations. There is something else. Something alive. He reached out to me just after we landed. A presence. And why didn't you warn us? The Doctor asked, a note of accusation in his voice. Even after all this time, you still can't bring yourself to trust me, can you? If you remember, my dear Doctor, yourself and Miss Chaney did leave the ship rather quickly before the word I'm looking for is... flounce? The Doctor glared. It doesn't change anything, Doctor. There is still something out there. Something in the rock? Exactly. The Doctor fell silent for a second, his mind racing. And something extremely hungry. Now it was the Master's time to look bemused. The Doctor, meanwhile, began jabbing at this control and that, throwing random switches and pulling levers almost as if he knew what he was doing. You've heard of the stone tape effect, I take it? The Master groaned. Oh, we're not going to have one of your tiresome lectures now, are we? I'll never forget how they jeered dear old Lethbridge back at Cambridge. He was really quite shaken, but I soon rallied round. Thomas, I said, the closed cloisters of academia will never embrace the free thinker. I should know. The Master ran a hand through his hair, fighting the irritation that threatened to bubble to the surface. And your point being, do I need to remind you that delightful Miss Chaney appears to be in mortal danger? Now who's being slow on the uptake? The Doctor asked. On the scanner, the shadows moved even closer to Allison. Thomas theorized that the ghosts and ghoulies weren't visitors from another plane of existence, but were simply recordings of extreme primal emotion. And that the physical environment, in this case the rock, acted as a recording medium to preserve the charming scene of posterity, the Master concluded. Precisely. When a person sees what popular fiction throughout the universe calls a ghost, their mind acts as a tape recorder playing back the images in the stone. But there is a slightly more tangible problem, is there not, Doctor? The Doctor tutted. Well, of course there is. We're not dealing with a mere recording. But the principle is still the same. Whatever is trapped in the rock is sentient and feeding off of our memories like some... The Doctor struggled for the words. Psychic vampire. Melodramatic, but somewhat appropriate. Yes, whatever the mood sucker is, I think it's been asleep for a long time and our arrival awoke it from its slumber. Triumphantly, the Doctor hit a final switch with a flourish. There! I've reprogrammed the TARDIS scanner to focusing on the psionic reference within the canon. We should be able to see what Allison is seeing. Look! The image on the scanner screen shifted as if through heat haze, and the doctor gasped as a barrage of scenes flashed before them. A coffin being lowered to the ground, wet black blood spilling across the altar, the heavy beat of a dance track, wet black blood spilling across an altar, the tenderness of a dark bedroom, wet black blood spilling across an altar, opening a present under the shadow of a sparkling Christmas tree. Allison pulling the trigger, the guard's brains splattering across the metal of a wall. The doctor's hand slammed down onto the console. Wait, that isn't Allison's memory. Well, I would hope not, otherwise we're harbouring a murderer. We are. You! A quizzical smile lingered around the Master's lips. Well, I must confess the scene does have some familiarity about it. It's your memory. What exactly are you implying, Doctor? You and I, we are increasingly and uniquely linked to the ship, but you even more so. The Doctor pointed at the Master. I designed you and the TARDIS to be inseparable, and somehow it's your consciousness that has awakened the beast. The puzzlement was replaced with a knowing smile. Well, how flattering. It's so nice to be the organ grinder once again and not the... The words died in the Master's throat as his eyes spun upwards, the faceplate swung outwards, revealing the android's reality. The Doctor lifted his hand away from the deactivation switch on the console. The TARDIS shuddered, buffeted by an unseen wave of energy. The Doctor grabbed the controls to steady himself. Yes, you didn't like that, did you? He shouted up at the ceiling, but the momentary triumph was destroyed by Allison's scream of agony on the scanner screen. Leave her alone! The Doctor nearly screamed, slamming his fist on the controls in frustration. The image on the scanner began to change rapidly, cycling through a mass cacophony of conflicting emotions. In the chamber, the shadows drew closer to the suspended form of Allison, wave after wave of psionic energy slamming into her. One of the shadows took on a more human form, its whispery, incoherent form rising up, its raised arm brandishing what could have once been a dagger. The Doctor raced around the controls, flicking switches, turning dials, but nothing had any effect. You've had the canopies, he shouted at the scanner, and now you want everything else on the menu. The TARDIS was slammed sideways as the Doctor was thrown to the ground. Behind him, the Master's metallic features sparked with tendrils of blue energy for a split second. The Doctor sat bolt upright, looking at his consciously absent companion. Still connected, he said quietly. I wonder. Allison screamed again, launching the Doctor into action. You're a leech, he called up to the ceiling, ducking underneath the console and returning with a thick coil of copper wire that was connected to the console. A vampire! He unrolled the coil of wire and ran to the Master, attaching two bulky crocodile clips to either side of the android's temples. Feeding on our emotions! The Doctor's hands were a blur across the controls, and the central column began to vibrate with power, throbbing into the vaulted ceiling. An eruption of sparks cast a halo around the Master's head, ribbons of blue energy snaking down the wires into the depths of the controls. You used him as your conduit, didn't you? Recognise an evil almost equal to your own, and use that to get to me. The Doctor glanced at the scanner, and the shadows were drawing even nearer. And Allison. Whatever you are, whatever evil created you, you must have caused terror beyond belief. The Doctor placed his hand firmly on a lever. But let me tell you, you've got nothing on my companion here. Whatever atrocities you've committed, he's perpetrated worse. If it's evil you want, then it's evil you shall have. The Doctor pulled the lever. A wave of energy blasted from the police box's lantern, zigzagging across the darkness of the chamber to the envelope that still suspended Allison. The shadows drew back from the cold blue aura cast by the energy wave, lighting up the chamber, and the cracked, broken altar stained with long spilt blood. The Doctor's entire body was suffused in Croatian energy, bridging the circuit between the Master and the console. His hand whitened around the lever as pulses of energy flowed from the Master, streaming down the wires. The Master's still form began to glow hot. Waves of violent power cascaded up through the central column. The aura around Allison burned incandescently. At first they cowered against the light that their victims had cowered centuries before, as they'd slaughtered and fed on spilt blood. But then, as if the craving renewed its hold on their souls, they began to inch forward, dim eyes full of new banquet. For a second they seemed to glow, feeding off of the energy all around, features forming on their wraith-like forms. Eyes burned, nails tore through the air, teeth bared. Allison screamed, pain searing through her as the remnants of an ancient cult swelled up and advanced step by step to plunge a knife that would burst her heart. The Doctor screamed, the energy wave from the console lapping around his arms, the Master's memories scorching his mind, atrocities he thought he could never have imagined. The shadows screamed, fingers clawing in the air, a banshee wail soaring in pitch as the wave reached its crescendo of intensity. Such evil to gorge on, such loathing. Too much to contain, too much to resist, too much to... As final surge of raw power flared across the cavern, splintering the shadows one by one as the cacophony reached its peak. The ancient altar cracked and ancient exploded into dust, the final victim of the tidal wave of hate. And the echo died. Alison's body then thudded to the ground, with silence following. Alison pulled the tartan blanket closer as the Doctor draped it over her shoulders, absently pulling at the thread in the stitching of the old leather chair. She didn't look up as a glass was thrust into her still shaking hand. The golden liquid swilled inside. She sniffed it. Brandy. It's a good one, so sip it. Alison glanced up at the flaccid Master, leaning like a discarded puppet by the central column. What happened to him? She asked. The entity was using the Master as a conduit to the TARDIS and us. His psionic essence, if you will, was broadcast by the ship on our arrival. It's curious, neither my intelligence, nor the TARDIS's for that matter, awoke it from its snooze, but the Master must have something in common with the creature that struck a nerve. Perhaps it's because he can't leave the ship, just like that thing couldn't leave the cave. A shadow passes over the Doctor's features. Perhaps. Whatever, the empathic link, no doubt boosted by the ship's telepathic circuits, was enough to trigger the stone tape effect. Vampirism at its most primal and brutal. The grandfather clock at the threshold of the TARDIS inner chambers ticked by the handful of the torturous seconds. And so I was forced to deactivate him. It was the only way to loosen the entity's hold to get us out of there. The odour of the liquor stung Alison's nostrils. Isn't that a bit too easy? The Doctor didn't reply, looking absently at the control dial. I said, isn't that a little too easy? He looked up. What do you mean? I thought he was your friend. The words seemed to faze him, just for a second. He was. He is. Alison snorted with laughter. For someone who's so clever, you can't be half stupid sometimes, Doctor. The Doctor narrowed his eyes. I beg your pardon? It doesn't work like that in the real world, Doctor. In my world. You don't get to switch friends off when things get tough. Well, I had no choice. Alison nodded sadly and sniffed at her drink, considering another mouthful. She looked at the Doctor in the eyes. What happens when you have to turn me off? The Doctor kept her gaze but didn't answer. Alison threw her head back and downed the brandy in a single gulp. The blanket fell silently to the floor. She pushed herself up from the chair and disappeared into the staircase, up towards her room. The Doctor waited for Alison's steps to fade into the distance before turning back to the console. He paused, thinking, before throwing a switch. The Master's body tensed as the power surged through the relays and circuits, motors and servos buzzing until all was calm. The two companions stared at each other wordlessly, the Master's eyebrow giving the merest hint of a twitch. The android glanced down, brushing a flake of dust off its pristine cuff, and coolly strolled down towards the console room, hands clasped behind his back. The Doctor was alone, save for the throb of engines in flight. As the clock struck an irrelevant hour, he reached for the decanter and poured himself a very long, stiff drink.
Welcome back to the Who Den. And it seems we have a mystery afoot on the new episode of Doctor Who starring Ncuti Gatwa and Millie Gibson. In one of the Doctor's scenes, it seems that there's some faces that are coming around. It looks like the fugitive Doctor is there. I know the War Doctor is there, and there is one more Doctor that I saw there. I don't know what it means. If you look, you can see who he is. And that, guys, is the Shalka Doctor. What does this mean, guys? I don't know. But does it mean the Shalka Doctor with Richard E. Grant is coming back? I'm not sure. We know Big Finish has the Fugitive Doctor starring Joe Martin in 2025 Adventures. So she's coming back. So could this mean the Shalka Doctor is coming back? It could be. Stay tuned, guys. This is Kurt Schweiger Jr. for The Who Den.